Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing the film Jackie, which is directed by Pablo Larraín. Here he, along with the writer as well, wanted to create kind of an impressionistic version of what we would consider a standard biopic, which really depicts aspects of the life of Jackie Kennedy Onassis. That's one of the things that I really liked about the film, at least in terms of the actual concept of it. I'm not really into biopics typically because it's really, at least to my mind, when you're telling the story of somebody from beginning to end, it's hard to create a lot of that dramatic tension without breezing over very crucial points. I think often those moments are kind of cheapened, and also they fall into so many different cliches and it's kind of hard to avoid them. I kind of prefer when you take a famous person, a historical person, whatever, and you take just a snapshot of their life that really speaks volumes about who they are and who they represent rather than the entire story of their life. And that's what the film is attempting to do here. It's really just looking at the part of Jackie Kennedy's life post-assassination, during and post the assassination. So she's dealing with obviously all that trauma of her husband being dead. How does she tell her children? How does she make that transition from First Lady to not First Lady? She's trying to figure out how she wants to go about the funeral, because all of this stuff is about how the Kennedys are going to leave their mark in the history books. That's very, very important for her. She really wants to make a major impression in the consciousness of the American people. She's not a person who cares much about truths, what happens behind the scenes, the dimension of everything, including the flaws. What she's interested in is pursuing the legacy that her husband left, or might have left, because, you know, he died so young. The historical significance of things is very important to her. It's important to the Kennedys, and I think that she does care about that. She does care about fame for herself. I mean, there is a line in it where she says she doesn't, but I don't necessarily believe that. And the framework of the story is built around this foundation of her being interviewed by Theodore White, who was a political journalist, and he's asking her about the legacy of the Kennedys and about the assassination and all of that. And then, you know, during the film, obviously that's the framework, but there are little kind of scenes, moments, sensory moments here and there of her time at the White House as First Lady, and then obviously the majority of the meat of the story is about the assassination. The aesthetic of the film is impeccable. It actually reminds me a lot of like Todd Haynes' work, a lot like Carol. It just has, you know, this beauty about it, but this very grim kind of melancholy tone. Larraín uses 16mm film, so it has that kind of grainy, stripped down quality in contrast to all of this kind of sophisticated elegance of the White House, as well as Jackie herself. That's what she was known for. And he really likes that camera to be right in her face. He really is trying to almost kind of crack that veneer, that mask that she wears. But that's kind of my big problem with the film, even though the aesthetic of it is very interesting and I like that. My problem comes from maybe the way it's directed, the way that it's written, and Natalie Portman's performance. This film is about a subject that is and was very, very heavy. And yet, as I'm watching it, the film just evoked almost no emotion from me. It's very clinical, very cold, and yes, that's the point to a certain extent, but I found myself asking, you know, what am I supposed to get out of this? What's the point of it? Because so much of what the film is trying to do is very counterintuitive to what it seems to be saying. Let's start with Portman's performance as Jackie Kennedy. I had a very interesting reaction to it. In some ways, I think that she's kind of perfect to play Jackie Kennedy. And in other ways, I think she's completely wrong for the part. I have never been a fan of Natalie Portman. I think that she just does not have that charisma, that command on the screen as an actress. She's not untalented, obviously, but there's always been this sort of disconnect. All of her performances are very calculated, very fragile, and they feel very forced, very studied. And I just never feel like she truly understands the character beneath just the initial viscera of what she's doing. Yes, she can cry and she can give a look, but there's nothing underneath it. But in some ways, all of those characteristics serve her very well in playing Jackie, because that's pretty much how Jackie appeared to the public. You know, she was a debutante, somebody who really studied etiquette and knew how she wanted to present herself to the world. Someone who never wanted to shed that porcelain shell and expose any flaws at all. But I think there are ways of showing that obscurity without seeming one note. And I think a lot of the actors around her in her ensemble are doing that. Peter Sarsgaard, he, I think, is a wonderful actor, kind of the master of subtle intensity. He's almost deadpan, almost has a dead expression on his face, but yet I feel so much tension seething underneath in every role he does. Here he's playing Bobby Kennedy. I think he does a great job. I can say the same for John Carroll Lynch, who's in this movie. He's not really in it that much, but yet I felt so much of a character from him than I did from Portman. They expose very little about the characters, but yet they make them compelling. And yes, Portman has the mannerism, she has the walk and the voice, but there's nothing underneath all of that. And it's not all of her fault, certainly. I think a lot of it has to do with the writing. This does feel very much like documentation of events. It has a very procedural feel to it, trying to peer into the inner life of Jackie during all of these very intimate moments. But I never felt like the screenplay really arrived at any conclusions. And I don't mean neat and tidy bows of endings, certainly, but conclusions about the character herself. She'll say, Jackie will say certain things, make certain claims here and there in the script. And I think, oh, that's an interesting thing that she's saying. Let's explore that. And it's never really explored. These are just kind of touched on. Even though she's going through a lot emotionally in this film, I didn't feel that emotion because in terms of the way the screenplay is written, the stakes just felt kind of low and they're not grounded in anything other than the idea that she is impenetrable. And the choices that she makes are about how she wants to be perceived and nothing really beyond that, no real dimension to the person. And yet the way it's shot, the camera specifically is basically daring us to find some sort of dimension in this person because the camera is right up on Natalie Portman's face, as I said, constantly. And it's constantly following her in these very intimate moments that the rest of the world did not get to see. But again, I feel like you've got to be really confident in your actress to be able to show that. It's almost like Carl Dreyer trying to do some sort of Renee Falconetti thing where, in Joan of Arc, he's got, it's always on her face. But yet that I felt so much more was at stake emotionally, and I felt her performance so much more than this one. Again, this one felt very kind of robotic, very one note, and the script as well. Neither of them are helping. So when you've got a camera that's trying to create the drama, it wasn't enough for me. There's not much that amounts to anything. All we really get is that Jackie does not want to reveal any truths to this journalist. She's wanting a certain poised impression that she's giving to the public. I'm not speaking, of course, about history, the real history. I'm talking about how it's portrayed in the film. And in terms of the story, I did not feel that there was much of an arc, that the character of Jackie really gained much, and that she progressed in any direction. And you need to have that in a film or else you just don't really have anything to take away from it. And I'm not saying this is a bad movie. There were certain things that I liked. I liked the kind of the way that they built the narrative in the sense that you have all these sensory moments going backwards and forwards in time is to me kind of a very powerful sense. And that's kind of how memory works. It's not grounded in a beginning, middle, and end necessarily. And that works, especially for Jackie, at the end of her time at the White House, she's going to do that. She's going to reflect on all of these different moments. And I also love the score by Mika Levy, which, it has a very kind of dark, very haunting feel to it. But I mean, really what this score is doing is it is just draining any sort of emotion out to the surface because there isn't really. It's doing a lot of the work. I think without the score, this movie would not work at all. So maybe this film just isn't for me. If you want more of a kind of procedural study on certain events rather than an impressionable work that's really giving depth, then this might be for you. And if that's what they were wanting, if that's what they were going for, the filmmakers, then they certainly achieved it. But ultimately, for me, it just was not enough. I forgot about this movie like 10, 15 minutes after I saw it. And especially when you're watching a movie that's about the JFK assassination, that's not something that you want. So I can't really recommend this movie, unfortunately. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page and link below that. Watch more videos here if you'd like, and you can also subscribe, but only if you want to. Catch you next time.